Okay, we will start reading from where we stopped last week. But before going into that, in the last week reading, we had this term dialectic, or sometimes they use even the dialectics or something. This is a very complex term because dialectic is used in many different senses. Now, basically, the term dialectic is used in the sense of logical system or logical reasoning. So, as a general term, but the term dialectic has been used basically as a process of two opposing forces finally working together to bring out some kind of agreement. So the idea of thesis, antithesis, and then thesis is opposed to antithesis, but then two theses and antitheses finally coming together to make what is called synthesis. So, that kind of process. So initially, in this sense, this idea was used by German philosopher Hegel, and Hegel's idea was borrowed from Karl Marx in his philosophy. So Karl Marx's philosophy is sometimes called dialectical materialism. So how this materialism arises, from these two forces, two opposing forces, ultimately causing, directing to one direction. However, when the T.R.V. Murthy uses the word plane higher than reason is dialectic. So he thinks that dialectic is a higher plane than reason. So reasoning is something you do with concepts, and then basically with two opposing concepts. So dialectic is to go beyond those oppositions. Now, for example, usually in what is discussed in this Murthy's book is Nagarjuna's philosophy. In Nagarjuna's philosophy, you have dvaya or dualistic views, asti, nasti, and so on. So now, reasoning operates at the level of dualistic view, asti, nasti. So according to T.R.V. Murthy, when you go beyond reasoning, you go beyond that dualistic model, asti, nasti. And then when you go beyond dualistic models, it is not reasoning anymore, it is dialectic, according to T.R.V. Murthy. So, some of these terms you have to understand how different authors used. But then here the idea is that reasoning ultimately, when you go beyond reasoning, then you are ending up with dialectic. So whole idea is dialectic to be a process something higher than reasoning. So where you don't deal with dualistic thinking, if this is not that type of thinking, but you transcend that dualistic thinking, and that is called dialectics. So it is the meaning that T.R.V. Murthy uses this term. Okay, in our last week reading, we stopped at page 50. Last section of this paper is now section 7, Anticipations of the Madhyamika. Anticipations of the Madhyamika. Anticipation means before Madhyamika came into being, the sort of philosophy that was presented by Madhyamika was anticipated or the formulated earlier in a rudimentary manner, that is anticipation. Something happened to happen in future. So we will read it. That the Buddha did not mean the doctrine of elements to be an ultimate standpoint is evident from certain trends and texts of the Pali Canon, although they have been subjected, as is accepted now, to a careful and partisan revision and editing by the Theravadins. Okay, that the Buddha did not mean the doctrine of elements to be the ultimate standpoint. Now, that whole clause is the subject of that statement, that the Buddha did not mean the doctrine of elements to be the ultimate standpoint, is evident. So that whole thing, starting from that, ending in standpoint, is the whole thing. You have to take as the clause, the operating as a noun. So the fact that Buddha did not mean the doctrine of elements to be an ultimate standpoint is evident from certain trends and texts of the Pali Canon. So he says that we can see that the Buddha, in a way, thought that, this doctrine of elements, that means Skandha Dhatu Ayatana, was not to be the final. So he says that that is evident from the certain trends and also texts of the Pali Canon. Now about Pali Canon, he says, although they have been subjected, now that means Pali Canon, and as is accepted now, to a careful and partisan revision. To careful but partisan. Partisan means partial, loyal to one particular group. So the partisan revision and editing by Theravadins. So Pali Canon has been edited and revised by Theravadins to suit the Theravada view. So that is what Murthy says. Now, there is a very interesting methodological question when we study Buddhism. What is early Buddhism and what is Theravada? Now, usually in traditional Buddhist studies circles like Sri Lanka, Myanmar, we don't make a distinction between early Buddhism and Theravada. Actually, the distinction of early Buddhism, this whole concept came with the particularly the modern studies of Buddhism. When the modern scholars started studying Buddhism, they are not particularly Buddhist, but they are Buddhist scholars. They came up with the idea that, there is something called early Buddhism, represented by Pali Canon, and then later Buddhism represented by Visuddhimagga and Atthakatha and all that. Now, that is a modern academic view, that started with the Europeans, the studying Buddhism. Before that, of course, we didn't have that kind of division. People read suttas and then they read Buddha Ghosha's commentaries to understand it. So the idea was that you read suttas and then you read the commentaries in order to understand. So the commentaries give the right way to understand. That is the traditional way of looking at. But then modern scholars are of the view that they say that, the early discourses are different, commentarial discourses are, commentarial analysis is different, and so on. So this is the modern view. In fact, this modern view is partially correct, I would say, because early Buddhist discourses are there, the commentaries belonging to later period. So, in a way we can say that two are two different things. But on the other hand, partially we can say that this is not correct because European scholars, when they started studying Buddhism, they expected the Buddhist countries, the people in the Buddhist societies to be behaving like in the Pali text. They thought that, people are so overwhelmed with the idea of dukkha. So when you go to these countries, you will find, people who are so miserable looking because, life is suffering. But when they came to these countries, they found that people are really smiling and even smiling more than they need to smile, So then they came up with the idea that what is in these countries is the corrupt Buddhism. What is in the countries in the corrupt Buddhism. So the real Buddhism has to be found in the books. So that was the kind of conclusion they drew from that. So they thought that books present the correct Buddhism, societies present the wrong Buddhism or corrupt Buddhism, this kind of thing. And then when they looked at the suttas and also the commentaries, they made this distinction. Suttas are early and commentaries are later. So in other words, the distinction early Buddhism and Theravada. So what is meant by early Buddhism was basically the Pali Canon. What is meant by Theravada is, subsequently developed Buddha Ghoshas, Visuddhimagga and other things. So this is basically the distinction this T.R.V. Murthy seemed to be referring to here. Okay. So then what happened was in the Buddhist studies, first there was only the Pali Canon. The printing of Pali Canon, introduction of the Pali Canon to European countries started in 1880s, like with Rhys Davids going from Sri Lanka, start publishing Pali texts in the PTS Society. But toward the beginning of last century, 20th century, then people discovered the Chinese Agama. And also later, Tibetan Kanjur and Tanjur. Now with these things, initially the concept of early Buddhism was limited to Pali text. But with the discovery of Chinese Agama, Chinese Agamas were early texts belonging to other Nikayas. They were translated into English. So when they discovered these things, the concept of early Buddhism was kind of expanded to include Chinese Agama and, those early texts. In fact, even up to today, some of these early texts are being discovered. Now, there is a project in, I think, one, gosh, I don't remember the name, but Gandhari scripts are even being deciphered, and that means they try to read them, and also they are being printed even now, even very recently. I think University of Washington, maybe Richard Solomon, I'm not sure the name. So he is publishing even very recently. So you can see some of these very ancient textual traditions are still being unearthed. And so the concept of early Buddhism was expanded to include all these things. Now in the present academic writings, people really don't make that distinction very sharply. Now today when we say Theravada Buddhism, of course it includes the Pali Canon and also commentaries. It doesn't mean that there is no distinction between the canon and the commentaries, but people don't make that much of a distinction anyway anymore. Now, more recent times, like last maybe 20-25 years or so, people are using concept of Theravada Buddhism to refer to Pali text and also to the other things. Not anymore the concept of early Buddhism. Okay, so but I remember in Sri Lanka in 90s, 1960s, 70s, and up to 80s or something, we were using the concept of early Buddhism very much in the universities. Even today we are using, because in Sri Lankan context we are using early Buddhism to refer to the Pali Canon. But then, it depends on. Like some people include what is called pre-modern. Pre-modern means before the 15th century, up to 15th century. 16th century we consider to be the beginning of modern period. So then pre-modern, all the pre-modern texts also be early Buddhism. So, these concepts are kind of volatile. Depends on how people use them. But in here, in T.R.V. Murthy uses this idea here, although they have been subjected, as it is accepted now, to a careful and partisan revision and editing by the Theravadins. So the Theravadins editing Pali text. Okay, we will continue. The Buddha declares Rupa, Vedana, etc. to be illusory, mere bubbles, etc. In the Majjhima Nikaya it is stated, depending on the oil and the wick, does the light of the lamp burn. It is neither in the one nor in the other, nor anything in itself. Phenomena are likewise nothing in themselves. All things are unreal, they are deceptions. Nibbana is the only truth. Now this is a reference to the Majjhima Nikaya 3, that means Majjhima Nikaya, okay, just give the, the page number. Depending on the oil and the wick, does the light of the lamp burn. It is neither in the one nor in the other, nor anything in itself. Phenomena are likewise nothing in themselves. They are like unreal, they are deceptions. Nibbana is the only truth. Basing himself on this text, Nagarjuna says, in declaring that it is deception and illusory, the Lord means shunyata, dependence of things. So he refers to Nagarjuna. Now you remember where Buddha says, Pena pindupamang rupang, Vedana bubbulupama, Marichikupama sanya, Sankhara kadalupama, and so on. Panchaskanda is compared to the bubble and, the lump of foam and, so on. So referring to this text, Nagarjuna says, in declaring that it is deception and illusory, the Lord means sunyata or dependence of things. So that is end of that paragraph. So there shunyata and dependence of things are taken together. Condemning that incapacity of some of the monks to understand the deeper inner meaning of his teaching, Buddha speaks of the bhikkhus of the future period thus. And also, at some point, Buddha referring to certain monks who are not able to understand the deep Dhamma. The monks will no longer wish to hear and learn the suttantas proclaimed by the Tathagata, deep in meaning, reaching beyond the world, dealing with the void, sunyata padisangyutta, but will only lend their ear to the profane suttantas proclaimed by the disciples, made by poets, poetical, and adorned with beautiful words and syllables. That's very interesting. If Buddha said this, even during that time there were discourses proclaimed by the disciples, made by poets, poetical, adorned with beautiful words and syllables. Now, that's very interesting. How come these kind of things were included in the canon anyway then? I mean, see, these are some of the things that are evident. This statement attributed to Buddha, we can't believe that canons were, the Pitakas were already there during the time of the Buddha. But what the Buddha says is, degeneration that could happen in future. So it refers to discourses proclaimed by disciples. But then in the Pali Canon, there are discourses proclaimed by the disciples like Madhupindika Sutta, Satyavibhanga Sutta, but they are not considered to be anything inferior or anything. They are equal to what the Buddha said. So, here, this reference to the suttantas proclaimed by the disciples, I think this was said somewhat later period, thinking of the Mahayana Sutras perhaps, when the Mahayana Sutras came into being, Otherwise, we can't believe that during the time of the Buddha itself, there were suttas like this. There is no reason to believe that. So Suttantas proclaimed by disciples. What are these Suttantas? Basically, we know the Mahayana text perhaps, made by poets. Some of these texts are very poetical, adorned with beautiful words and syllables. So, all these things refer to the subsequent development. Anyhow, Murti refers to this sutta. This is a significant admission that the real heart of Buddha's teaching is the doctrine of Shunyata, as the Madhyamikas claim. So, based on this particular evidence of this discourse, Murti concludes that significant admission that the real heart of Buddha's teaching is the doctrine of Shunyata, as the Madhyamikas claim. Nagarjuna is justified in declaring that the Buddha has nowhere taught the doctrine of elements as the ultimate tenet. So the Nagarjuna says that Sarvopalambopasama prapanchopasama shiva nakwachit kasyit dharmo buddhena deshita. So Murti interpret that as to mean that Buddha has nowhere taught the doctrine of elements as the ultimate tenet. Actually, when you look at the sloka Murti refers to, that sloka, Nagarjuna's statement, doesn't refer to doctrine of elements, really. It doesn't refer to Dharmavada. But anyhow, Murti is using that as, example of that Buddha did not teach Dharmavada, but I don't see that supporting his claim. Anyhow, the Madhyamika standpoint is clearly stated in some celebrated passages. So the Madhyamika standpoint is clearly stated in some celebrated passages in the discourses of the Buddha. Buddha tells us that there are two principal viewpoints, the existence and the non-existence views, Bhava Ditti and Vibhava Ditti. No one holding to either of these can hope to be free of this world. Now, according to the Buddha, there are two dittis, Bhava Ditti and Vibhava Ditti. Anybody who is holding these views cannot be free from this world. Only those who analyze and understand the origin, nature, and contradictions of these two views can be freed from the grip of birth and death, samsara. Now this is number 3, he refers to sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, Udana Niti Uttaka. Kaccayana desires to know the nature of the right view, Sammaditthi. And the Lord tells him that the world is accustomed to rely on a duality. On the it is Atthitam and on the it is not Nathitam. So this is reference to Kaccayana Gotta Sutta, where Venerable Kaccayana's question was, what is the Sammaditthi? When he asked from the Buddha what Sammaditthi is, then Buddha goes on describing that in the world there are two views. World is accustomed to rely on a duality. Attita, Nattita. Ye bhuyyena dvanisitoyang loko. Dvanisitoyang loko ye bhuyyena. But for one who perceives in accordance with truth and wisdom how the things of the world arise and perish, for him there is no is not or is. Now, in Pali, in this sutta, it occurs, Loka samudayang ko kaccana yata bhutang passato ya loke nattita sana hoti. If you see the Loka samudaya, rising of the world, then nattita will not be there. Loka nirodhang ko kaccana yata bhutang passato ya loke attita sana hoti. If you see the Loka nirodha, then there will not be attita. So Buddha says this. Murti puts it, but for one who perceives in accordance with is and truth and wisdom how the things of the world rise and perish, for him there is no is not O is. That everything exists is Kachana one extreme, that it does not exist is another. These are the two extremes. Not accepting the two extremes, the Tathagata proclaims the truth from the middle position. Nagarjuna makes pointed reference to this passage in his Karika, declaring that the Lord has rejected both is and is not views, all views. Now here it is a reference to Kachayanagotta Sutta. Actually, as I said earlier, Kachayanagotta Sutta is the only sutta that Nagarjuna refers to by name. But there are many other instances where Nagarjuna alludes, indicates, points to the certain other suttas, but they are not mentioned by name. Only discourse that he mentions by name is basically Kachayanagotta Sutta. Okay, we move to the next paragraph. The Ratnakuta, Kashyapa Parivarta. Ratnakuta, another name is Kashyapa Parivarta, which is one of the early formative texts of the Mahayana. Early formative text. Early formative text means a text that belongs to the formative stage of the Mahayana. That means before Mahayana really came up, but when the Mahayana was coming up. So that is the formative years, development years. Explicitly mentions the two standpoints, Atma and Nairatmya Vadas, and the middle position as transcending both. So Ratnakuta Sutra mentions Atma and Nairatmya Vada, and the middle position as transcending the truth. A similar view is you find in Sutta Nipata, Attang, Nirattang, Nahitasatki. So both Atta and Niratta have been rejected. Buddha compares in the Alagadupama Sutta, now Alagadupama is in the Majjhima, the dharmas to a raft which has to be left off after crossing the stream. They are not meant to be taken as ultimate tenets. Madhyamikas take this as the Upaya doctrine, having just a means value. It is to be abandoned after it had served its purpose. Now, in the Alagadupama Sutta, Buddha refers to it, Buddha compares dharma to a raft. Kulalupamang, kulala upamang. Buddha says, Kulalupamang vo bhikkave dhamman desissami nitharanathaya. In order to cross over, no gahanathaya, not to grasp it. They are not meant to be taken as ultimate tenets. Tenets are the doctrines. The Madhyamikas take this as the Upaya doctrine, having just a means value. Now what is the Upaya? Upaya Kaushalya or Upaya. Actually, Upaya is a concept that was very much developed in the Mahayana, according to which Upaya is the Buddha's skillful means. You know, Buddha would certain things not because really that is the ultimate thing, but simply because as a means to teach others. So Dharma is really a Upaya, in the sense you make use of Dharma. Once you make use of it, then you give it up. Now, if you look at Alagadupama Sutta, that is what it says. It is to be abandoned after it has served its purpose. So you use a raft to cross, but then after crossing, you don't think that, okay, this raft has been very useful to me, and you keep the raft on your back and go. No, you don't do that. You just leave the raft there and then you go. So Alagadupama says, Dhammapi pahatabba. Even the dharmas have to be given up. So when you give up dharmas, then what about the adharma? What is not dharma? Even dharma has to be left behind once it serves the purpose. So means value. Means value means we talk about ends and means. Now end means ultimate goal you are trying to achieve. Means is what you are trying to the method. So we are talking about the means and end. So means the instrument or method you are using. End means the final goal. So means and end means the method you are going to use in order to achieve the final goal. So the means and ends. Now ultimately dharma is only a means to an end. Dharma is only a means, only a method, only a device, only a tool to attain the ultimate goal. Once you attain the ultimate goal, of course, it really has served the purpose, and then, you forget about it. So Buddha compares in the Alagadda Upama Sutta the dharmas to a raft, which has to be left off after crossing the stream. They are not meant to be taken as ultimate tenets. The Madhyamikas take this as the Upaya doctrine, having just a means. So in the Buddhist literature, particularly in the Mahayana literature, you have this Upaya. Indicating that pain is conditioned by imagination and is nothing real in itself. So the pain means dukkha is conditioned by imagination and is nothing real in itself. Buddha refers to the parable of demon Vepachitta, who was bound or freed according to the evil or good nature of his thoughts. Now this Vepachitta's story is very interesting. Vepachitta becomes bound if he has bad views, bad thoughts. He becomes free if he has good thoughts. So, it's purely Vepachitta's life is controlled by, determined by whether he has good thoughts or bad thoughts. The moment he has bad thoughts, he becomes trapped. Moment he has good thoughts, he becomes free. That imagination, kalpana, is bondage. And the cessation of kalpana is freedom, is a fundamental Madhyamika tenet given expression to at several places in his Karikas by Nagarjuna. So the kalpana is the mental creation. So the imagination is bondage and the cessation of kalpana. So imagination, kalpana, creation by mind, all are the same. Attention must be drawn once again to Buddha's rejection of all speculative philosophies as dogmatism. Ditti or ditti gatani imani. Ditti gatani imani. Ditti gatani imani. Ditti or ditti gatani. I don't know why he has to mention imani there, but anyhow, ditti or ditti gatani. English translation is speculative philosophies or dogmatism, speculative views. And his declaration that the Tathagata is free from all theories. And also Buddha says that Tathagata is free from all theories. This is in entire accord, this is in entire agreement, this is in entire accord with Madhyamika standpoint of criticism and rejection of all theory as constituting the highest wisdom. So according to Madhyamika, the highest wisdom is rejection of all views. Not any view, not holding to any view. Now, this is an interesting point. In my earlier Nagarjuna discussion, I showed you in the very last stanza of Nagarjuna, he salutes the Buddha at the end of the book by saying, Sarva Drushti Prahanaya Yah Sadharma Madeshat Anukampang Upadaya Tang Namashyami Gautamam. Sarva Drushti Prahanaya. So the Buddha taught the Dharma in order to Sarva Drushti Prahana. To Prahana means eradication, cessation of all the views. So what Murthy says here is, reference to that. So the whole idea was the Madhyamika standpoint of criticism and rejection of all theory as constituting the highest wisdom. So the highest wisdom is to reject all views. Importance also attaches to the antinomical way of stating metaphysical views. Antinomical way of stating metaphysical views. Antinomical way is again reference to European philosopher Immanuel Kant. So Immanuel Kant says when you have these dualistic views about metaphysical things, you can't beyond whether God exists or God doesn't exist. You can't go by rational reasoning according to Kant. So that is the antinomical way of attaining metaphysical views. The fourfold formulation of alternatives, which is a regular feature of some of the dialogues, anticipates the form also of the Madhyamika dialectic. The fourfold formulation of alternatives. Actually, fourfold formulation of alternative means Chatushkoti, right? Now, usually we have two alternatives. Two alternatives are either something to be true or false. But fourfold alternative means there are, four positions. So you have, basically you have T and then you have F. This is the dualistic. But then the third one is, T plus F. And then fourth position is neither T nor F. Now there are two more. So these are the four alternatives. Now about any given situation, according to this view, there are four positions according to this view. So usually in the regular logic and also Aristotelian logic, we have only two positions. Either something proposition is true or proposition is false. But here you have something to be true or false or both or neither. Now these are the called. Now this is what is called Chatushkoti really. Chatushkoti means four-cornered. So Chatushkoti. So Koti means corner, alternative. Chatushkoti means four alternatives. The passages favoring the Madhyamika interpretation may be few and greatly dispersed with text of a dogmatic character. So here he thinks that, passages favoring the Madhyamika interpretation may be few. There may be only few, and they are interspersed with text of dogmatic character. They are spread all over. Nevertheless, they necessitate a reinterpretation of the entire body of Buddha's teaching. Although such passages are only few, because of those passages, you have to, that is what it means, necessitate a reinterpretation of the entire body of the. So some of these occurrences require you to reinterpret Buddha's entire teaching. Look at in a new manner. For it is possible to subordinate the doctrine of elements to the absolutist teaching and not vice versa. So it is possible to subordinate the doctrine of elements to the absolutist teaching, but absolutist teaching cannot be subordinated to the doctrine of elements. So the absolute teaching means Paramartha Deshana. So according to Murthy, ultimately doctrine of elements becomes unnecessary or false, but absolute teaching is not. So he says that it is possible to subordinate the doctrine of elements to the absolutist teaching, but not vice versa. The skandhas, dhatus and ayatanas may be taken as having phenomenal validity. Phenomenal validity means, phenomena means our experience, okay? So in our day-to-day experience, phenomenal, related to the day-to-day experience. So skandha, dhatu and ayatana may be taken as having phenomenal validity. So the validity, phenomenon validity. The relevance only to the phenomenon phenomenal world. Their formulation would still be significant, but their although they have a phenomenal validity, their formulation is still significant. But the text which speak of them as illusory and fit to be rejected as ditti cannot be understood in any other manner except as the ultimate teaching. So what the Murti says is, on the other hand, while giving the Skandha Dhatu Ayatana teaching, at the same time discourses say that Skandha Dhatu Ayatana are mirage-like, unreal, or the Skandhas, particularly we know Pena Pindupamang Rupang, Vedana Bubbulupama, Vedana like a bubble, Marichi Kupama Sanya, Sanya like mirage, Sankara Kadalupama, Sanskaras like plantain trees without any essence, and so on. Mayupamancha Vinyanam, Vinyan is like Maya, illusory. So, these doctrines, the texts which speak them as illusory and fit to be rejected as ditti cannot be understood any other manner except as the ultimate teaching. Now those things, Murti says that they have to be understood as ultimate teaching. Now the problem is referring to this. On the one hand, we are talking, the suttas talk about Khandha Dhatu and Ayatana. On the other hand, about the same Khandha Dhatu and Ayatana, discourses say they are illusory. Now which doctrine to be taken? So actually, when Buddha talks about Khandha Dhatu and Ayatana, he says that has to be taken in the phenomenal sense. But when Buddha says that Khandhas are like mirage or bubble, that has to be taken as absolute teaching, ultimate teaching. You remember in one of my early discussions, I referred to Nitattha Desana and Neyattha Desana, direct speech and the indirect speech. So it's something like this. Ultimate is Nitattha Desana. An analogous case, the analogous case is the relative value attached into the para and apara text in the Upanishad. Now in the Upanishad, there is a division called para and apara, paravidya and aparavidya. We are told in what appears to be a canonical text that we should attach value to the text of primary and ultimate import, nitartha, and not to those of secondary import, neyartha. The Madhyamika exegesis, exegesis means exposition or description or analysis. The Madhyamika exegesis consistently explains and interprets text on this direction. So now he refers to Nitartha and Neyartha. And also he refers to ultimate teaching and maybe the other thing as the provisional teaching. So also he compares this with Paravidya and Aparavidya in Upanishads. Okay, so those are the similarities in other systems. We move to the next paragraph. That the early Buddhist view was like that of Madhyamika has not wholly escaped the notice of Orientalists like Kern, Otto Franke, Posin, and even Keith. So he says that this view, that early Buddhist view is like that of Madhyamika, has been noticed by other scholars. Example, Kern, Otto Franke, Posin, and even Keith, Berridale Keith. Kern says that from the outset, Buddhism was an idealistic nihilism. So Keith's idea is that, Kern says, Kern's idea from the outset, that means from the beginning, Buddhism was an idealistic nihilism. So he described Buddhism as idealistic nihilism. Now nihilism means to deny everything, to say that everything is doesn't exist, not applicable, cannot know. So that is a nihilism. Nihilism means not finding any meaning in anything. That's nihilism. So according to Kern, Buddhism is an idealistic nihilism. Idealism means, ideal means something to be the topmost thing, ideal. Highest thing you expect to achieve is ideal. So this is the idealistic nihilism. That means Buddhism, according to Kern, advocates nihilism to achieve the highest ideal. That the early Buddhistic view was like that of Mahayana, negative though the argument establishes, even taken on its own claims, that the view was idealistic with a tendency not wholly conscious or articulate to negativism. So he quotes the further, that the early Buddhistic view was like that of Mahayana, negative, though the argument establishes, it's negative, but it is argument establishes that the view was idealistic with a tendency to negativism. So the Buddhist view is idealistic with a tendency to negativism. I mean, that is what Kern says. So T.R.V. Murthy, the writer, refers to this in here. The Majjhima Nikaya freely contains the ideas of voidness. Now he says ideas of voidness, sunyata. So if you take the sunyata idea, the Majjhima Nikaya freely contains the ideas of voidness, says Keith, giving exact references to a number of passages. So that is what Keith does. Belief in the existence of ideas is merely a raft to enable men to cross the ocean of existence. This accomplished, it should be cast away for the useless thing it is. Now you know this again in Keith, Berridale Keith's view, he refers to the Alagadda Upama Sutta referred to above. Then Sariputta confronts Yamaka with the question whether the true self of the Tathagata is his material form, and receives a negative reply. So the Sariputta confronts Yamaka with the question, with the true self of the Tathagata is the material form, and receives a negative reply. So Sariputta asks from Yamaka whether the true self of the Tathagata is his material form, and Yamaka says no. Similar replies are given to the questions whether he is in the material form or in him. You know, we had this the accounts before, whether something is in it or whether it is in it. In the Katavat Upakaran discussions we had, or different from it, and so on, with the four other constituents which make up the apparent individual. So Yamaka and Sariputta discussion is about Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankhara Vijnana, whether the Tathagata is Rupa, whether it is Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana. And then answer is no. Then the question is whether the Rupa is in the Tathagata, or Tathagata is in the Rupa, or whether the Tathagata is outside the Rupa. So all these questions are asked and then negative answers are given. Yamaka also admits that the five constituents, five aspects, all taken together do not make up the Tathagata. Then what happens is Tathagata as representing each individual Khanda is rejected, and then the question comes whether the Tathagata is a combination of all five Khandas, that also is rejected. Taken together do not make up the Tathagata. No, again, is he without the five constituents taken together. But on the other hand, you cannot say that Tathagata is without the five Khandas. You cannot say Tathagata is with five Khandas, or you cannot say Tathagata is without five Khandas. Sariputta then confronts Yamaka with the conclusion that even in life he cannot comprehend in truth and essence the Tathagata. So even in life, the living Tathagata cannot be comprehended in truth and essence by any other person. That a posteriori, a priori, a posteriori, it is absurd to make assertions on him after the death. Now, a priori, a posteriori, I mean that is the two division we talked about, that a posteriori is different. It means it is absurd to make assertion on him after death. That means when the Tathagata is dead, you don't have Tathagata anymore. So it is no point to make certain conclusions about Tathagata in the absence of Tathagata. So without any factual reference. That is what is meant by a posteriori, make assertions of him after death. Does this mean that even in life Tathagata cannot show Yamaka cannot show the Tathagata really to exist, and still less of course in death can his nature be stated? The interpretation is possible and in entire harmony with the Madhyamika view. Now, this is very interesting. This Yamaka and Sariputta discussion is kind of interpreted as Tathagata cannot be known by the five khandhas. Tathagata cannot be known without the five khandhas. Then the question is, Tathagata cannot be known while he is living, and also he cannot be known while he is passed away. Now, this particular discussion, according to Murthy, now he is making use of this, the ambiguity of the interpretation to his advantage. He asks, does this mean that even in life, Yamaka cannot show the Tathagata really to exist? So, even when the Buddha is living, someone cannot really point out that Buddha is living. But still less, of course, in death. If you cannot describe the Buddha in life, it will be even more difficult to describe the Buddha after death. Can his nature be stated? The interpretation is possible and in entire harmony with Madhyamika view. Now, if you give this interpretation to this particular discourse, Nagarjuna, Murthy says that goes along very much in accordance with the Mula Madhyamika Karika view. Because there, what happens is the Buddha is elevated to a position where, Buddha cannot be known, Buddha cannot be described. So even the living Buddha cannot be described. Therefore, no question about the Buddha after the Parinirvana. So, that is what it says. It is not contended that we have a full-fledged dialectic in the Buddha. However, he says that he doesn't say that there is full-fledged dialectic in the Buddha. Although some of the discourses of the Buddha can be interpreted in this manner, Murthy says that full-fledged dialectic is not in the Buddha, in the early discourses, but that there are definite suggestions and indications which led, as a matter of logical development, to the systematic formulation of the dialectic of Madhyamika. So what he says is, even though a full-fledged dialectic is not in the discourses, there are certain ideas in the discourses that ultimately paved the way for Madhyamika dialectic to arise. So as a matter of logical development, so in other words, the logical conclusion of some of the ideas of early suttas is Madhyamika dialectic. That's the logical conclusion. The reason for this is that the conflict in reason which engenders the dialectical consciousness. Now what does it mean? Conflict in reason. Now conflict in reason means our effort to articulate metaphysical views by logical reasoning. So logical reasoning cannot. So that is the conflict in reasoning. Now that engenders, that creates, that engenders the dialectical consciousness, both itself, dialectical consciousness was itself not in a systematic but suggestive stage then. So that has been not put in the systematic manner, but of course early discourses suggest that. Only as the rival systems developed and differed radically from each other could their opposition be sharp and sustained. Now, the position, opposite to Nagarjuna's position could be highlighted only when the rival systems subsequently develop. And then clearly you can see the differences between these two traditions. This presupposes a period of several centuries wherein the systems took their definite form. So this presupposes several centuries. So for this to happen, it took several centuries after the Buddha. The Madhyamika represent that systematic stage of the conflict in reasoning and the solution of the conflict by transcending the alternatives. Now, so according to T.R.E. Murthy, Madhyamika position is this. It represents the systematic stage of the conflict in reasoning. So Madhyamika represents the conflict in reasoning. And the solution for that will be this conflict is to transcend in the alternatives. So the idea is something like this. So if you take the views, or if you take, so you have what is called, we have asti and we have nasti. Now these are what is called dualistic views. Now this is the, we can say, domain or field of logical reasoning. Now this belongs to this asti and nasti belongs to domain of logical reasoning. So through logical reasoning what you can do is prove one and disprove another. You always have to go for one position by disproving the other. If you prove this, you disprove this. If you prove this, you disprove this. However, now this is what we call logic. And then from this, we call dialectic. Dialectic is to transcend the limits of logic. And then where in dialectics, you reject both. Okay, in the dialectic, both positions are rejected. Now, interesting thing is, in logic, you have to accept one position and deny another position. So that is logical thing. But that is up to which point you can go by logic. But when you go beyond logic, what happens is you deny both positions. So what Murthy refers to as antinomical nature of logic means, of course, it refers to Immanuel Kant, but what Kant believed to have shown is that, logical reasoning is always dualistic. You have to either disprove or prove one thing, but if you want to give up the both positions, then of course you are going to a higher situation where logic doesn't work. So this is what Murthy says. Okay, so we have completely read this whole thing. It took several hours for us to go. But why I selected this particular piece to read this again for number of reasons. One thing is, this is an interesting reading. But apart from that, of course, this supports the kind of discussion we are doing in the Nagarjuna Mula Madhyamika reading, because, he is one of the leading interpreters of Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamika Karika. So here you can see that Nagarjuna's position is being interpreted as, something that goes beyond this logic. Now, interesting thing is, of course, when you try to understand Murthy's position, it is partially correct. It's partially correct. Because when you say this, it goes beyond dualistic logic, it is true. However, Murthy tries to interpret Nagarjuna and the Buddha to be ultimately occupying absolute position which is ineffable, which cannot be described by language. Now that is where, the Murthy's interpretation become problematic. So apart from that, Murthy's interpretation, so in a way partially correct according to my understanding. But, that is how we have to, that's how I understand it. But, my understanding is not the only way to understand. You can do your own reading. But, I think we come across some very important things. I think rather than we take in a break, why don't we have a short discussion and then we wind up for today. So what are your comments? Do you have any questions or anything to to discuss, or any particular thing which you don't really clearly see? How do we understand this? Now, if I may take you from the very beginning, we started with, the some interpretations of these things, and then different positions about Nagarjuna, agnostic, and the negative interpretations, given by different. And then section 2, we talked about the antinomical character of the Avyakruta. Antinomical means that something that goes beyond logic. So that is antinomical character of the Avyakruta. The interesting thing is, you take the whole concept of Avyakruta, Buddha not giving an answer. So not giving an answer in the sense of not going into the domain of logic. Because if you go to the domain of logic, then you have either yes or no answer, right? If you debate about asti or nasti, you can always go to asti by refuting nasti, or go to nasti by refuting asti. So you have an answer. But Avyakruta, not answering means actually you cannot give that kind of answer. So the Murti's question is very interesting, important. Why Buddha did not give an answer? So that type of answer. So the Murti's answer to that question is, Buddha realized the antinomical character of the logic, so Buddha had to go beyond that. When you go beyond logic, of course, there is nothing much to talk about. You have to keep silent. That's the idea. And then we have Buddha's solution to the problem, section 3. Reason involves itself in deep and interminable conflict when it tries to go beyond phenomena and seek the ultimate ground. So, that's how he sees these questions. He talks about the transcendental unity of things. And then section 4, he talks about Abhidharmika interpretation of the Avyakruta, where he refers to the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya analysis. Now, according to that analysis, Buddha did not answer these questions, not because they involve some kind of conflict in reasoning, but simply because the listener's mentality was not up to that. And then listeners' ideas were considered, intention was considered, so that's why Buddha did not answer. Then section 5, we have the real transcendent to thought. The real means the absolute or something that exists really. So it transcends the thought means you cannot think about it. The real, in the R capital, the real is something that goes beyond your thinking. If something goes beyond your thinking, if you can't think about something, you can't talk about something. So going beyond thought means going beyond language, going beyond speech. You cannot talk about it. So that's the section 5, and then we have true nature of Buddha's silence. Then in section 6, he tries to explain why Buddha was not really, Buddha did not really give yes and no type answer. The answer was that the dialectic was born, in the sense Buddha went into higher position higher than logic, which is called dialectic. And then the last section, anticipation of Madhyamika, what we just read today is, there are certain discourses like Kaccayanagotta Sutta, where Buddha anticipates, Madhyamika position can be anticipated or can be thought about from some of these things in the discourses. Actually, now this is in a way what people like Kalupahana try to say. According to Professor Kalupahana, entire Mula Madhyamika Karika is a grand commentary to Kaccayanagotta Sutta. Because it doesn't go beyond the philosophy of the Kaccayanagotta Sutta. So therefore, in that sense, entire Mula Madhyamika Karika is a big commentary. So that means only an explication of what Kaccayanagotta Sutta says. Okay, that is basically the summary. Any questions? Comments? Pardon me?
Buddha did not answer according to the audience.
Buddha did not?
Answer
Oh.
this question
Okay.
in one conclusion according to the audience. I mostly went to agree with that point because we have another subject.
Rohitassa.
Sutta.
Sangyutta Nikaya.
In this sutta, it's not identical, but the question is similar. It's also asking or touching the end of the universe.
Yes, yes.
The Buddha answer in another way. The universe is not the outside universe in the world.
Correct.
Loka in the world. So in this case, we can check this sutta also. We can discuss.
Actually, Rohitassa Sutta, what shows is that, ultimately the universe in the physical sense, gamanena napattabbo lokasanto kudachana. You can never reach the physical end of the physical universe by going. Because, this person goes, for 7 days, without finding. But then on the other hand, Buddha says, nacha appatva lokantam dukkha pamochana. So without reaching the end of the universe, there is no release from suffering. So that second universe is really your internal suffering, internal universe. So it's very true because in a metaphysical sense, whether the antavaloko, anantavaloko, Buddha doesn't answer that question. Thank you very much for pointing out. That's a very important sutta, Rohitassa Sutta in the Sangyutta Nikaya. Okay. Any other comments?